Welcome to The Focused View, the podcast for eye care professionals across Australia. In each episode, we bring together leaders from optometry, optical dispensing, and business to share insights, practical strategies, and the latest developments shaping independent practice today. I'm your host, Michael Nasser, and together we'll explore how innovation, collaboration, and smart business thinking can drive growth, enhance patient care, and strengthen the future of independent optometry. Whether you're a student, an early career professional, or an established practice owner, The Focused View is your go-to source for knowledge, inspiration, and connection. The Focused View is brought to you by Vision Connection, supporting independent eye care professionals across Australia through collaboration, education, and business growth. By working closely with leading suppliers and industry partners, Vision Connection offers unique opportunities that help independents stand out and succeed. To find out more, visit their website, visionconnection.com.au. In today's episode, we're joined by Tim Duffy, a name that's well known in Australian optometry, not just for his 40 years of clinical experience, but for the way that he shaped independent practice in regional Australia. Tim's story is one of leadership, community, and legacy. From building thriving practices in rural New South Wales to mentoring the next generation of optometrists, his career reflects what independence in eye care truly stands for. We explore how optometry has evolved from the days of Smoking Joe Lederer and the brass plaques to the advanced profession that it is today. Tim shares candid reflections on what it takes to build and sustain a successful practice, the importance of giving back to the community that supports you, and why succession planning is as much about values as it is about valuation. Whether you're early in your optometry journey or thinking about what comes next, this conversation offers a rare perspective on what it means to build something worth passing on. So let's get into it. Tim, welcome to the show.
Michael, I'm very pleased to be here.
Really excited about today's episode. We're going to be speaking about a whole heap of topics, and that will lead through to sort of talking about succession planning and what that looks like. But before we get into it, and for the purposes of the audience, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. Look, I'm one of nine boys, so we were born and raised in a small country town called Dubbo in central western New South Wales. Mm-hmm. So my childhood memories, revolve around my parents, often my mother saying, "For heaven's sake, boys, for God's sake, get outside." And we say, "Mum, it's 40 degrees or 98 degrees in those days." And she said, "I don't care, get outside, have a water fight, just don't be playing on the roof."
Okay.
So we spent our entire youth out in the backyard, cricket and footy, soccer, Cowboys and Indians, all those sort of things. So I'm being one of nine, good Irish Catholic descent. So the caveat is to be aware that the family motto was, never let the truth get in the way of a good story. So I grew up in Dubbo, went off to university. After we all went to school, all went to Joey's for 6 years. Okay. So that was the nine boys, 54 years of school fees at St Joseph's in Sydney,
right, yeah.
Which is a phenomenal effort.
Yeah.
We spent 6 years there, and then off to university. I chose optometry. In those days, things were simpler.
Yeah.
We got our HSC mark, went down the list, medicine, right, dentistry, law. Too many lawyers in our family already. Mm-hmm. I'll do optometry. So off to optometry at the age of 17 and finished our 4-year degree as a 21-year-old.
Wow.
So, very young, immature.
Yeah. So what drew you to optometry? Was it as simple as that, just going through the list and sort of looking at them and thinking, this is what I want to do? Or was there anything else that sort of got you thinking about it?
Yeah, look, I was always keen on physics. I love physics and maths and like the health side of things. Yeah, so I thought that was a good fit for me.
So, you graduated, you went through the course, graduated as a 21-year-old. And I guess what did those early years look like for you? And I know you obviously went on to set up a practice in a regional town, and talk to us about those early years and how they developed.
Yeah, so finishing at that age and with a big family and quite a few brothers coming on, the big emphasis was to get on and get a job. become independent, fend for yourself. So I went and worked with an uncle of mine who was a dispenser in those days in Dubbo. I spent about 18 months working with him, and we worked at small country towns, Coonabarabran and Coonamble. And I worked with him for about 18 months, did the usual trip to the UK, spent some time in mid-80s, 84, when the Wallabies were playing.
Yeah. Well, you've been a Joey, so obviously you're a mad Union fan.
So we're there for that. I came back and then after that realised, look, I don't want to be working for somebody else. I want to be the master of my own destiny. So I then set up my own practice in Gunnedah, and we then incorporated our trips to Coonabarabran as well. So we used to, and in those days it was wild old days, so we used to have the chart on the wall, an ophthalmoscope, a retinoscope, probably a slit lamp, a Perkins tonometer, and then I was working on my own for a little while, and we used to do Monday Coonabarabran, drive 100 k's to Coonamble, and then drive 150 k's or 60 k's to Lightning Ridge, back to Walgett, and then 250 k's back to Gunnedah on Thursday.
Right.
And it was the wild, wild west. So we were sort of seeing and doing all sorts of things and managing patients, the best we could with the limited resources that we had. But seeing what we've got now, and the equipment that we have now, I shudder to think
what might have been
the standard of care that we had then was the best that we could. But my goodness,
at the time,
it was the wild, wild west.
Yeah, I mean, I know the areas relatively well. We go up to Walgett quite almost on an annual basis, and we drive through Coonamble and Gunnedah and that. So and it is quite isolated as areas, and I could imagine, especially back then when you were getting started, it would have been a very different, I guess, situation as to what it is today. But totally understand from that point of view the demographics as well as the area, and I guess the diversity of probably what you were seeing.
Yeah,
and that comes by way of being in a rural practice or rural practices where effectively, you become, a lot more than just the optometrist in those situations. You're seeing a lot more diversity, I imagine, of issues and conditions, and that's a positive in some ways, and we'll talk about that as well as we get going. So you've set up your own practice. You mentioned that you identified early on that you wanted to be the master of your own ship, and obviously started with your own practice. So I guess if you can speak to that a little bit, like how did the practice grow, and what were some of those key strategies early on that you felt, you did well and that helped you succeed?
Yeah, so it was obviously, much different time then, simpler time. So there was, private practice and basically OPSM. And that was the interesting days when you weren't able to advertise and in actual fact, and some of the practice was sort of in some ways attacking itself. So some folk would be criticising others for the size of the brass plaque on the side of the building. So it was a very reclusive and unenlightened. And there was quite a strong rivalry between optometry and ophthalmology.
Yeah.
This was the days of Brian Holden and Fred Hollows, and there was not really much assistance at all for people for practice, for private practice, independent practices. So you're basically off your own bat. So these days now, with Provision and with Eye Care Plus and with these other organisations that can help, run your practices. But in those days, it was pretty much put your shingle up, get out there, get amongst the community, do what you can to forge relationships with local doctors and the local ophthalmologists and the pharmacies, and then become involved in the community. So join the local sports clubs and then help looking after the people that you are, who you're living with, and and become embedded in that community. And then just, you're on your own bat and away you go. And but it was great because it was, as I say, running a practice was simpler, and I had one full-time staff member and a part-time staff member, and that was the profitability of the practices was better then as well. So it was the old story in those days. It was, a third. So one third of your costs one third of your income was spent on fixed costs, one third on running costs, and one third was profit, roughly. So that was a much simpler, and the regulation and the constraints of running a business was much simpler. pre-GST and all those things. So, but you're still running your own ship.
A lot of things that you mentioned there early on were quite, I guess they still stand true today. I mean, one thing that I've sort of taken from what you mentioned is there was immersion into the community and being involved and networking and connecting with, the GPs and the healthcare professionals and the allied healthcare professionals in the region. That still stands true today, obviously more so than ever as well, especially for an independent practice. But you did mention that there are support groups now that exist, with the likes of ProVision, iCare Plus, OptiPro, iBenefit, and a lot of consultants that are there or thereabouts that obviously wouldn't have existed back then. So did business come naturally to you, or where were you seeking your support early on with regards to, was it the optometry community itself? Maybe you had a couple of optoms that, were in a similar boat and you created, I guess, group. I mean, how did that look like in terms of getting that support early on, knowing obviously that you had the networking, I think, covered and the relationship sort of side of that business already covered, but then focusing more on those business things, or did it just happen just by fluke?
Yeah, well, I think we could put an ad in the paper to sort of, tell people that we were there, but it was certainly was no advertising per se of products or whatever, but you could tell people that you were there. But otherwise, we did have some, quite a few folk of our era. Yeah. So of some, guys and ladies who were starting off, and a few of my mates ended up out in the country. Mm-hmm. So we would get together and compare notes and play a fair bit of golf and do a bit of socialising, but we were all doing the similar sort of things. Mm. And it was good. It was, life was pretty, and business was pretty straightforward. Mm. So you didn't need to have as much staff, and it was easier to run a business. And one of the nice things about being in the country, so we were, and even to this day, even with our expanded practices, we are the only service provider in those areas. Mm. So you're not having to be worried about, people taking scripts out of town, and people would trust your opinion and value what you are doing for them. Mm. And also our scope of practice was, quite extensive. Yeah. So
that's a good point you mentioned, and something I want to expand on. What's happened over the years, I imagine in your cases, there's been that expanding scope. Is that something that came naturally? I mean, or did technology drive that for you? Was it more, I guess, patient requirements being in the
it was a bit of both.
Can you speak to that? And what does that look like today compared to, say, what it was when you started?
Yeah, so once again, being a rural practice, so now between our practices at Gunnedah, we cover Gunnedah, Coonabarabran, and Narrabri, Moree. So our group of practices now cover about 50,000, 60,000 people. Wow. And we're the only optoms that service those areas. So consequently, as we used to do, we've got to deal with extensive, foreign bodies and acute injuries, whether it's a burn, a welding flash, or an insect, or chemical, and then, things like irises and high pressures and hypopians and herpes simplex and herpes zoster, and so then you have the things that you can't handle yourself that you've got to refer on. So we were dealing with that. Now that's by necessity. So we didn't choose to do that. People will turn up into your practice, and we had to learn how to. So we were expanding the scope of our practice, not by our personal interest per se, but more by looking after the people who are coming to see us. And we did and still do, Aboriginal eye care. That's all part of our service to the community. And you've just got to handle, because if we don't look after these folk, it's sometimes 1, 2, 3, or 4 hour drive to the nearest ophthalmologist. Mm-hmm. So we have ophthalmologists come into our practices at Moree and see patients there as part of a co-management arrangement. They do visits to the hospital and do surgery, and we help with aftercares. And then obviously we've got quick access to any specialist for any of the conditions, because they know that the type of patients that we see, that if we do need to contact one of the ophthalmologists in Sydney, Brisbane, wherever, then they know that we're doing that because it's an urgent need. Yeah. So it does mean that you do learn too, and obviously the great thing about the doing primary care and this acute care is it makes your day exciting, you know.
Yeah.
These people don't book in, they ring up and you might have a busy day and then all of a sudden you've got a bad injury you've got to look after. So that makes life interesting.
And how else do you think? I mean, that's obviously one of the drivers there of what you've had to do is the community and meeting their needs, and that's probably one of the better ways to develop business, obviously, and that's happened quite naturally because of the confines of the setting of being in a regional area. Other than that, what other aspects do you think about being regional? I guess changed your approach or managed your approach compared to, say, a metro practice, and what are some of those main differences that you've seen from, you know, being a rural-oriented or rural-based practice as opposed to, say, a metro-based practice, assuming that you've obviously got colleagues in metro and you've probably seen the differences between the two?
Yeah, so because you are dealing with those things, you have to have the equipment to do it, which sort of gets back to your question earlier as well. So what we used to do is we'd buy a new piece of equipment, whether in the early days it was a field tester or an OCT or whatever, and then once we'd paid the lease off for that, we would go out and buy something else. So that constantly we were upgrading our equipment so that we could look after the people who came in the door. So that was sort of built into our equipment base, which then gave us the ability to look after and treat lots of these things. So we've got, you know, IPLs for dry eye and OCTs and wide field cameras and several different tonometers and topographers and, you know, a wide gamut. So by doing that, then that has given us the ability to look after these patients and monitor these patients and give them the best standard of care that we possibly can. And if you do have an interest in a country setting, and particularly, you know, practice like ours, then you have a particular interest, then you can pursue it because the population base that you're dealing with is going to have kiddies with learning problems, is going to have keratoconus patients, is going to have, you know, migraine patients, is going to have dry eye problems. So anything that you want to specialise in or any interest of yours, you can pursue. And this is one of the nice things about being in private practice as opposed to working for a corporate practice is that any interest that you have, whether it's contact lenses or whatever, you're able to pursue. So, and you're not being restricted to time slots and KPIs and someone else telling you what to do. You're the master of your profession and your things that you like to do, and you make the choices to pursue that.
Yeah, I think we'll definitely unpack that a little bit further because I think it's a very strong draw card for independent or private practice, sort of as you're referring to, or independent practice. Just for context, I mean, when you started the practice, there wasn't as much competition, or if any. But how does that look like today in the relevant locations? I mean, I'm assuming competition did ramp up over those years to what it was when you began. And can you speak to how that's looked like?
Oh, look, we were approached by some of the larger corporate bodies when they first came to Australia, whether we'd like to join up, and we thought, you know, we're all set in our ways and we're not going to be told how to run a business and be taken over by. So we all said, look, thank you, but no thank you. So we do have the tyranny of distance on our side. Yeah, okay. So, but we do still have folk who go to some of the corporate, and one of the things that we do very much emphasise, we're very aware that the corporate practices are about. So we do emphasise with our equipment, you know, what it's for, why people are having it done, that this is giving them, you know, the best possible care and service. And we certainly use that high quality equipment for all of our patients. So we work a bit on the Robin Hood principle that, you know, if someone can't afford, so for our Indigenous patients, if we're doing our Brian Holden clinics, they get to use all the best equipment that we have. So they'll get the best quality of care, but they don't pay for it. And those who are in a position where they are able to pay for the better quality care, they certainly do. But everybody gets, that's our standard of care. Okay. Regardless of your situation. Okay. And the corporate world is there, and we're very aware of it. And some folk do, but I think if you explain to people what you're doing and why you're doing it, and you know, say, unfortunately, with a lot of the corporate world has been a race to the bottom. So it's about trying to get products. It's all about products. It's not about the experience. It's not about the care.
No.
And it's about trying to get a cheap product. And we are flipping that and say, listen, you get one pair of eyes. This is the most important thing. We're here to care for this. And at the same time, then, yes, we are going to give you good products to help you as you need to. But the most important thing is looking after your eye health.
Yeah.
Explaining what that's important.
I think, the common conception there and the generalization, which I also agree with, is that, the corporates do really focus on the retail side of the business very heavily. The retail being obviously the sale of the frame and the lenses primarily. And independents do that, obviously, but they also have a really big emphasis on the clinical care. And it's not to say that the corporates don't. They obviously do. But from the point of view of independence, you tend to find more often than not that most independent practices do really focus in on that clinical care and that standard of care and making that the primary, I guess, part of the business. And then that feeds into the rest of it too. Yeah. And it is that take. But, I mean, we've mentioned it obviously a lot now, and I do want to unpack that a bit, independence and what that looks like. You've obviously been an advocate for independence, and it's pretty clear that's something you've had from the beginning. Why does it matter so much to you? And I guess, can you speak to, I guess, that fire within you with regards to, being independent and advocating for independence and talking about it?
Yeah, it's about, this is one of the things, perhaps being in a smaller country town, but it even doesn't matter where you are. I've been working with my daughter Amanda in Belmont, who you did a fantastic interview with a month or so ago. And very much the same things that Amanda was saying. It's about caring for the people who walk in the door and treating them like you would treat your mother, brother, father, or do yourself. So, and that's the most important thing. And having treating them like family, and having a staff that you treat like family. And so, our staff retention has been phenomenal. We've got some staff that have been with us for 35 years.
Yeah, amazing.
We've had probably over 100 staff. We've got about 35 in amongst all the practices at the moment. So we have well over 100 staff over the years. And they've just been, it's all part of that family feeling. So that's that nice personal touch that I have never worked in a corporate business. So it's hard for me to compare, because I'm probably, obviously I am biased because I only have my opinion.
Yeah.
But I just don't know whether you can engender that philosophy into a corporate business that revolves around profits and KPIs and getting consult times down to 20 minutes and working on that sort of standard. So to me, it's a bit like the tail wagging the dog. If you look after your patients well, if you give them the care, if you treat them like you would a member of your family, then they are going to get the best optical solutions or contact lens solutions or what have you, and that will look after itself, rather than coming in from the perspective of, yes, we've got to reach these KPI targets, and that to me is getting the cart in front of the horse. So if you do the patient care first and treat everybody well and treat them as you would one of the members of your family, then that looks after the other perspective. And sure, we do have bonuses for our staff and for our optoms, and that's a case of rewarding them for the things that they've done and incentivizing them for their future work. But it's not about that. It's about patient care first, which then results in profitability.
Yeah, and that's it speaks to, I guess, one of the secret sources, I think, of private practice and independent optometry. It's also because they are invariably family businesses too. So in the instances of yourself, and I've been involved as well, obviously, in family orientated business, and you understand the importance of family in the context of the operations of what you're doing, and you can share that same, I guess, knowledge with your team around you, and you can appreciate that, and not just your team, but also your community, because that does drive through. Something Amanda mentioned to me as well that stands out as you're explaining this is the lifestyle concept. The beauty with our industry, I believe, as it's starting to develop and as we're becoming more aware of what we're doing and becoming more strategic, it does enable you to then plan out your life and be like, and again, this is just something as well as I believe one of the positives of independence, and you might want to add to this, but this concept of, being able to say, especially if you're a younger optom, and we'll get to that a little bit further on as well, it's like, well, if you do go in independence, you have the ability to to really, steer your own ship and to choose the profession and how you want to be a professional within this profession. But also it enables you to, whether there are kids in the horizon or whether you're planning, you want to work a certain amount of days and you want to build this out. I believe it gives you that too, as well as being a successful practice. And I guess if I mention that, what are your thoughts on that, and how have you seen that play out for yourself, in terms of what you've built over the years?
Yes, once the concept of having a 4 weeks holiday per year and being told you've got to work certain numbers of hours per week and do Saturday mornings or some Thursdays to whatever hours is just, for heaven's sake, that's, untenable. So, yes, so once again, you're the master of your own destiny. You've set up the business, you work as suits you, and you adjust that around your lifestyle. So, may have got it right. Live to, work to, you know what I'm saying?
You work to live, you don't live to work.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. So, I think that private practices need to perhaps be a bit more cohesive and coherent and sort of share the pool of, because then obviously you have some of the limitations perhaps of getting locums and so networking to help make those sort of things more tenable. We've always worked on the theory of having half a staff member more than you need. So if you need 2 optoms or 1.5 optoms, I'll have 2, and that gives you the capability of having some extra time off as you need to. So yes, but the whole idea of being flexible and being able to do the things that you want to do when you want to do it, well then that's what life's all about, and that's why you go and do the managing staff and managing practice and but that's all part of it. Then you can take the time off when you want to and plan around that.
And I guess it's similar with the offering that the store, presents. I mean, you also have the ability to control that too. And I feel like that's a huge carrot for independence. And it's fair to say that it's not for everyone. There are people that are very much designed to be, in that corporate space, and they love that. That they come to work and they do what they need to do, and that's what they're looking for. But the beauty of what we're talking about is that there are, I know of, lots of students or younger optoms that are harbouring this ambition, and what we're speaking about today will obviously speak to the benefits of what independence looks like, and obviously with your experience and how you've developed it over the years. But then going into it, and the second part of our chat will be then about what does that look like if you do want to get involved in it, and how that's worked for yourself, as you've, looked at the succession side of things. But before we jump into that, a real milestone for yourself and for your team, and I think it speaks volumes with regards to what you've built up there, was the awarding of the, correct my pronunciation here, the Josef Lederer Award for Excellence in Optometry in 2017. Can you speak to the recognition? What did that mean to you and to your team? And can you speak about that particular experience and I guess reflect on that for a bit?
Yeah, sure, Michael. Look, it was one of those things that came out of the blue. We obviously don't plan to work towards these things, but look, I accepted that award. That was basically based on progressing the role of practices and having good equipment and doing Aboriginal eye care. That was, and the fact that that's all in a rural setting. So, but that's basically, and when I accepted that award, I did that so basically on behalf of many of my country colleagues who are doing exactly the same thing. We're expanding the scope of practice, not based on a corporate model of trying to, increase our turnover through cooperation with ophthalmology and work. It was all based on patient needs, and a lot of my colleagues were doing the same thing that I've been doing, which was sort of going, I won't say unrecognised, but it was just happening behind the scenes. So we obviously did the therapeutics when it first came out, and so it was very, very nice to receive that award, and it was very humbling. And it was also, yes, as you say, it was a recognition of the fantastic team of other optoms who are working with us and our support staff, our dispensing staff. We probably had 40 odd staff go through the dispensing course.
Okay.
Over the, so that was all very much part of our constant improvement of our skills. So that was, a wonderful recognition of that. But and nothing has changed. Obviously, that's all things that we keep doing to this day.
Yeah.
But it was a very special thing. And look, Josef Lederer, he was a leader of the profession.
Tell us about him, because I actually didn't know who he was until you mentioned it in our pre-interview. Who is he, and what's the context of his involvement in the optical industry in Australia?
So Joe Lederer came out to Australia as a migrant after the Second World War. I believe he was Austrian. So we had him for the first couple of years at university as, 17, 18-year-old brats who were, irresponsible, immature. Joe was our lecturer. So Joe had a very strong Austrian accent. He looked a bit like Albert Einstein with some hair product. He's slightly heavily set. He'd have a cigarette hanging out of his mouth and talking with an Austrian accent about principles of optical instruments.
Okay.
So,
right.
So you can imagine you can imagine the captive audience that he had.
Sure.
But what he had done, though, he took optometry from a TAFE-based, a course that was done as basically as like a trade, and he took that through the university, created a degree course out of it, and so took optometry from basically a trade and turned it into a profession.
Yeah, wow.
So he was a monumental figure in the establishment of optometry to the profession that it is today. His wisdom and skill and intelligence was wasted on on our cohort, but we've lived to reap the benefits of the work he did. So yes, that was a wonderful thing.
No, absolutely, and I feel like, I mean, it's interesting to learn about the individual, obviously, who the award was named after, but I think, like you've mentioned, and I had before that, it was, that recognition, I think, is really a critical thing, and it's nice when it comes from, a third party, because it obviously just justifies and validates what what you've been building, and I think that's an important thing to take note of. And
look, and we had some wonderful those days. We had Brian Holden was teaching us. Brian Lane and Phil Anderson was one of ours. So these are all legends of and of the profession, and people who've made George Amigo, who've made a huge Steve Zantos, made a huge input into the profession and helped make it what it is today. So we were very lucky.
Yeah, and as you mentioned that, I feel like it's something that, maybe for another episode, but to speak about the individuals that help create and build optometry in Australia as we know it today, because it's quite easily forgotten, I feel, and it's something that definitely in some way should be, and I'm sure it is, but, maybe for the purpose of a podcast, just have that conversation where we can actually say, okay, who are the characters that were responsible for building optometry the way it is today, and where do they take it from, and what is it, what did that look like, and is that the vision that they perhaps had for it? So I think there's a lot to sort of be had for that. But if you're open to something like that, I'm really curious about that and the history.
Yes,
of all
sure.
of it. So,
yeah.
All right. If we sort of pivot back to the store and to what you've built, the business that you've been building, and one of the main points that I really want to speak about is this whole succession planning concept and what that looked like for you. You obviously, you went to uni, obviously had the entrepreneurial know-how to get out there and start your own business and drive to do that. Obviously build a really successful practice. The award obviously demonstrates that, as well as a heap of other things, I'm sure. At some point, you're thinking, okay, got to move on to the next stage now, and it's time to think about what that looks like. At what point did that come about for yourself, and what did that look like as you started to think about it initially for the first time?
Yeah, so the process has been one that's been developing, was probably developing over 10 years. So we were had purchased some practices from colleagues who were wanting to retire, and both in the Narrabri and Moree, wanting to retire, and these were people who were getting to the end of their career. They perhaps were starting to lose a bit of interest in the business, so they hadn't done much in the way of succession planning themselves, and they basically had decided that they'd had enough and wanted to get out and were looking to sell. So we bought those practices, and the practices were not running terribly well because the owners had sort of were losing interest, and they were just looking to get out and retire, which is how things worked out for them. I did not want to sort of have that experience. I very much enjoyed having students in, and we've always had students from the university come up to our practices. They're fantastic. They're a fantastic resource. They know all the technical side of things. We know the clinical side, but it's like having an encyclopedia walk around with you. And then we also thought they were very brave. They're coming out of the city, most of them, and they've had no experience of the bush, so they're coming out to the country. And so it was a wonderful thing. And we've had quite a few of those uni students then come on and stay. So as the practice has got busier and there's more to cover, I'm thinking I'm not going to be doing this myself. So the facts are that the decisions that people make within 5 years of finishing their university degree often determine where they end up, what they end up doing.
Yeah.
So if you're still in corporate optometry 5 years after you're graduating, chances are you're going to stay there.
Yeah.
Chances are. So I was very aware that I wanted to incorporate some of these young people, the next generation. So I wanted to give them the opportunity that I had, when I left university. I want to have them the same opportunities. So the process was of getting them in within a couple of years, and what I did was we offered a small percentage of the practice, so they could buy into the practice, buy a 10% share or whatever. And I had three of my partners who just decided they'd like to do that. So you get a valuation for the practice. You then also have a memorandum of understanding of the roles and the responsibilities, and also a legal document to say, to cover if a person doesn't want to stay after the 5-year period, or then they can sell out, and so some of those things. But that's just documents that can be organised through a solicitor. So it gave them a chance to get a feel for what it's like to running practice, and it was great for me because I was then able to hand on to them some of the roles and some of the duties and responsibilities. So then we did that for a period of time, and that worked really well. Everyone got along, and we were making this cohesive decision making about. But at that stage, as the main shareholder, at the end of the day, I was still able to make the final calls. But then once that developed, and the practices are running well because our optoms are invested in it. They've got skin in the game, so they're keen to become involved in the management, and so then as time went by, I was happy to sell on more shares, and one of our partners, for example, was happy to stay as she was, and she didn't want to progress to it. So the other partners, increased their sharing holding, and they were working more and contributing more. Some of our long-term optoms weren't interested in buying into our practice. But that sort of developed over another period of another 4 or 5 years. And then within the last 3 years, I've said, okay, this is 40th year of running my own business. Wow. And, Amanda at that stage had moved to the coast, and I'm thinking, well, and my other grandchildren are on the coast. I'm thinking this is perhaps a good time to hand over to the next generation. Right. So once again, have the practice valued. You've got your agreements set, and then I feel very comfortable now. We've finalised our sale in January, but I've stayed on and helped the passing over the practice, and waiting for the new optoms to come out and to work with us. Now that we've done that, I think everyone's been very, that whole handing over process has worked nicely. We're ready to move on to the next step. So hopefully, this is the thing about having your children, you've got to be nice to your children, because hopefully one day they might give you a job.
Well, I think we'll definitely speak about what that sort of looks like in your case, with Amanda still being in the profession. But with the succession planning, I think one thing that stands out with what you've explained is obviously you're very strategic in it. And I think this is really a really poignant point with regards to anyone that's listening, especially if they're in that phase of selling. Or a lot of the people that are listening to the podcast obviously are younger. From what I can tell, are younger optoms getting into the industry. I think it's totally right what you said. When you look at 5 years out of uni, where are you at that point? That's more than likely where you're going to end up. So if you're listening and you're at that space, trying to understand where you position yourself is really important. I know a lot of corporates that go to, I've heard of corporate optoms that go back into, say, independence at, say, the 2-year mark after. And even at that point, everyone's like, oh my God, like, what are you doing? Like even less than 5 years, that transition from independent to corporate, it is really seen as, that's a big move. Like, are you sure that's what you want to do? So I think that's something to point out. But then I guess the other thing there is the strategy that you've taken to ensure the succession is successful. So those people that are at that stage of selling their business or moving the business on or succeeding. If we speak more to that in your case, you identified that, say, 10 years out, 5 years out, I think you mentioned. What did that next steps for you look like when you'd identified? How did you go about finding the right, I guess, person? And what was your mindset like at that point, with regards to, okay, I'm going to, find an optom, I'm going to interview them. What did that look like? I guess if you step it out for us.
Yeah, sure. So, with the young optoms that I've sold our practice to, they've all, once again, I think they're tremendously courageous young folk. They've come away from their families and their and sometimes their cultural background, and they've come out to the bush. One of the lovely things about being in the bush is that because of the isolation, our populations are so grateful to have professionals who, regardless of their background, because they know that if it wasn't for these people being here, we wouldn't have doctors and pharmacists and dentists. So people are just so delighted to have new professionals in these areas. So the fact that these folk have come up and are working and involved in the community, and they were at a stage that I was when I first started. So coming up, and they've married local folk, and they've got families, and they're doing all the things that that I did 35 years ago. It's just a perfect fit, really. And once you get the feeling, and once you've got that, I'm not saying it's patriarchal so much to speak, but once you've got that family feeling that I would like to give these lovely, wonderful young people who are the future of these towns and the future of these areas and the future of the profession, I want to give them the opportunities that I had, and also knowing that then also is going to give them and these towns, these areas, the best, what I consider was the best long-term eye care, the best one. So rather than getting tied up about, what's this multiplier and whether you're going to make, more money selling to here or there or whatever, it's that feeling that you're leaving the district and the towns that have served you so well with great people to continue on what you've been doing. So that was one of the things that made me feel that this is a great fit.
Yeah.
And I can go away now thinking, isn't that wonderful? And I wonder who's going to be here, in 5 or 10 years when I'm not.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when you were making the decision to sell or to move on, I'm assuming that, and you sort of alluded to it earlier on, you would have had approaches from the corporates and in the many forms that they now, I guess, that they're in, and we know, I guess, the entities that make up the corporate space, and whether they're private equity based or whether they're vertically integrated based, they're quite well known. I guess that was never ever a thought for you, or was it always about the continuation of the legacy? Because you tend to find that, and from what I'm hearing, from your point of view, there was that legacy piece that you wanted to get going. You obviously built something really important, and you wanted to make sure that carried through, as you've mentioned, and afford someone the opportunity you had. Was that something that naturally came, or did you see offers from the corporates and go, no, this is not what I want? Because I'm sure that and the reason why I asked that is because I'm sure that there are people in your shoes right now that are looking at offloading their business in the next 3-5 years, and it's like, well, why would I pick one over the other? And I guess you've been at that point, and what could you say to that, and how can you speak to that for anyone that's listening that's sort of in that position that you were in when you made the decision to go down the path you went down?
Yes, yeah, look, and this is just my experience. I'm not going to take the moral high ground. However, I wasn't going to sell my soul. So sure, you might have got a few extra bucks, but I've spent 40 years of my life working in this manner and choosing to do that for the reason, not for the reasons I just think it's the best model for eye care. It's the best model for
your patients.
For patients, and it's the best model for these country towns. And having a corporate body that have evolving staff and optoms who are coming in and out that are just on a fly in fly out basis that are once again don't have any teeth in the game. They're not invested in the business. To me, that's their incentives for going to work and their motivation to be seeing patients and doing the things that need to be done particularly in rural countries, towns, is not the same as what I've been doing for the last 40 years, and not the same thing that the next generation are doing. So we'll get calls from the hospital and on the weekend, or people will ring us up saying I've got holding flash or a foreign body, or I've had surgery and I've got extreme pain in my eye and they've got really high pressures or what have you. So that's all part of the deal, and being able to look after those people and be happy to look after those people is something about being in private practice that I don't think a corporate system will have.
It's totally different, right? They're two different business operations, two different mindsets, and so I think it's fair to say that. And it's not about saying one's right and one's wrong. It's just they are different, and you've identified for yourself what that looks like, and you're staying true to that. And I think that's really inspirational. I think, and it's a message that I love the community here, and especially in independence, because there is that continuity of independence that ideally I know I'm very passionate about, and obviously you are as well. And so I think the more that we speak about it and how we can do it, it doesn't become this unknown, difficult, something that seems to have come naturally for yourself. There are other people that might not even identify as to what that looks like. So, I think the model that you've also employed based on the people that I've spoken to seems to be one that's quite successful. And I've heard of it being rolled out in a few different examples. And again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but basically, you identified a group of students, optometry students or younger optoms that were interested. They've made the commitment. Then, you've got them on board. And then over time, you've identified that they're the right, fit for the store and for your patients. And then you've worked to a model where they're essentially increasing their equity in the business. They're buying into the business small and then developing that over the years so they understand the dynamics. They can ensure that's right. Then you get the opportunity to assess that and identify whether you're happy with that. And that's just, naturally evolved to them increasing their interest in the business to the point where now you've been fully brought out. And obviously, now the hands that you're leaving the stores with. Is that effectively how that's rolled out?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. That's it in a nutshell. And look, and it's not it's not rocket science. It's not a difficult process, but it's a process you perhaps need to work with over a period of time.
Yeah.
So if you, particularly initial buying in stage, it's a small share of the business, which once again, if they decide they want to get out, they can sell out back to you. So you just do that gradually. So it's not threatening and it's not too much of a jump for an optometrist who hasn't been in the business long.
Yeah.
So just gradually give them a chance to get a feel for it and help nurture them, and which once again is wonderful because that gives you the opportunity to hand over more roles and duties and tasks, and then you just keep that process going on. It's like it's like your family. You start them off, and as they grow and develop, then eventually they're taking over, and you're at that stage happy to hand over.
Yeah, and just there are agreements that need to be created, and you spoke about a few of them. At what point did you sort of seek legal advice, and how was that? Was that something you did before you got the younger optom involved, or was that something that, as you identified, then you sought it? And how much did the solicitor advise, and how much did you know what to do from that point of view?
Yeah, so I've 9 brothers, so I've got a solicitor, an accountant,
wonderful.
couple of solicitors, so they were all over this. And from that perspective, it's not. But there also you can get help through certainly with Provision and iCare Plus, and it's not. You've got models, so it's not complicated documentation. It's out there. It's very available.
Yeah.
And you can tailor it to suit your own individual circumstances.
Yeah.
One of the things you've got to do is have a valuation for the practice, or a method of valuing the practice that people agree with. So the initial value that we had of the practice, say 8 years ago or 10 years ago when we first started this process, was less than it was finally, the final sale, because the practice was growing in that period of time.
Yeah.
So you have you have the valuation that's relevant for that period of time, and then that's so once again the optoms who are buying smaller pieces, and then which is affordable for them, but the return on investment for them is 25-30%.
Right.
So they can see over a couple of years that they've paid off their initial investment over a 3 or 4 year period. And so if you want more of the same, so that's So that's how the process
And
developed.
it's a very, I guess, powerful one. And I think that, again, the takeaway from this is, you mentioned 8 and 10 years, that this is not something that happens overnight. It doesn't happen in 1 or 2 years. This is a model that obviously has to be really well thought out. And I feel, when you do that and time is on your side, then that flexibility to craft that, I think, is really important, I think.
But look, there's no need. I mean, you can fast track that.
For sure. Yeah.
So, so that's how it worked for me. But there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't fast track that. I could see if someone's got a great young new grad who's doing great and they're keen, and you want to get out, then you can do that whole process in a couple of years.
Yeah,
easy.
For sure. I guess the point is, the more time you've got, the less you feel constrained to do it, and obviously the circumstances will differ from person to person. And things can also happen that might accelerate it that you don't foresee, and all that. Correct. I think the model in itself is quite a good one, and I feel like, at least touching on it today, at least it gives some people some food for thought with regards to what things could look like in a succession plan where, you're passing on the business in as close to the format that you want it to stay in once you sell it, and it continues in that same way to ensure that, again, that legacy piece is maintained.
Yeah.
I guess reflecting on it now, and I think you mentioned at the beginning, at the top of the episode when we started chatting, and maybe before we started recording, that this is your last week.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's quite. Yes. I think it's quite well timed that we're speaking about it.
Yes, correct.
As it all really is coming to a close, and I guess
correct. So yes. So I was always saying, I'm going to ride off the Cowboys used to ride off into the sunset, but hopefully I'm going to ride off into the sunrise to the east.
That's there you go. Love it. Thanks so much for your time today, Tim. I've really appreciated it. Thanks for listening to The Focused View. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a 5-star review, subscribe on your preferred podcast app, and share it with your colleagues. It helps us reach more eye care professionals across Australia. For additional resources and downloads, visit thefocusedview.com.au. I'm Michael Nasser. Until next time, keep focused.